Air Canada flights are going to be suspended in the coming days because of this, if this all comes to fruition. For several months now, the two sides have been unable to find common ground on several issues. So, our guest right now is Adam King. He's assistant professor in labor studies program at the University of Manitoba. And I see you've popped up there on Zoom. Hi, Adam.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. I'm better than a lot of worried travelers in this country, but why don't we talk about the issues here? So, the two sides in negotiations since March, what are the major sticking points right now?
The major sticking points involve compensation. First, unpaid work. Flight attendants perform really a large amount of their job unpaid. So everything that has to do with pre-boarding, safety checks, deplaning, is all unpaid work. They're really only compensated when the plane is in the air. And this is an industry practice that's really quite outdated and that the union's been trying to address for several years. Second is just general compensation. Flight attendants' wages have really been eroded by inflation over the past 10 years, particularly through the pandemic. They were locked into a 10-year agreement, so this is the first chance they've had to negotiate wages in 10 years. And flight attendants are generally pretty low paid. A new flight attendant at Air Canada earns less than $2,000 a month pre-tax. And so the union is really trying to make up for past losses when it comes to compensation.
Have they made any progress in these months?
It seems like maybe some, but the parties are very far apart on those two issues in particular. Air Canada has made a wage proposal, which is somewhere around 17% over 4 years, which might sound like a lot in percentage terms, but in dollar terms is really not that much. And even still, it doesn't address the past wage losses because of inflation and this very extended contract that these flight attendants were in previous to this. And when it comes to the uncompensated work component, Air Canada has offered to start compensating some of that labor, but only at 50% of their wages, which the union, of course, is seeking full compensation for all hours worked.
That issue of the unpaid hours, it's not just like airlines that are dealing with this and flight attendants. How has it been addressed in other workplaces then?
Yeah, so this is a practice that's, common across the airline industry. As I said, it's a bit of a hangover, a bit anachronistic at this point. Um, I think it's important to keep in mind too that this is a largely female-dominated workforce that's had to struggle for many, many years to have their work recognized as valuable and important and to be compensated fairly, and that plays into the issues here. When it comes to other issues in other industries and uncompensated work, generally we regulate this through employment standards in most provinces, right? There are rules around working time and when people must be compensated when they're on the job. So, for example, if you're in a company vehicle and you're on your way to work, because you're in the company vehicle, you're supposed to be compensated. So we have rules that are pretty all-encompassing to regulate working time and pay. And what's going on here is that this industry essentially has an exemption or a carve out that they're operating outside of those rules in the Canada Labor Code. And really what the union is seeking is an end to that. They're through bargaining, but also there's been legislation proposed federally to end this practice and to bring airlines, into agreement or into the standard practice of industries across the country.
So, how is it possible that they have a carve out? Because somebody might hear there's federally regulated rules, as you said, and you just said they're operating outside of this. So how has that been able to continue to happen, or is it actually a formal carve out, like that they've been exempt on paper?
Yeah, so I mean, across the country, employment standards legislation is often like Swiss cheese. There are many carve-outs for different industries because they've lobbied over time to have, particular exemptions from rules. This happens all the time. A new rule will be proposed around, notifying workers, for example, of shifts ahead of time or something, and then a particular industry will lobby the government and say, this is too onerous for us because of X, Y, and Z, and then they'll get an exemption. This happens frequently, and airlines is one of those cases where hours of work regulations, not all of them, but some of them don't apply to them because of past lobbying practices and
Got
just
it.
an exemption. Yeah.
So the feds didn't intervene with the recent issues around the pilots, the labor disputes around the pilots in Air Canada. So I understand it's expected that the federal government won't intervene here either, right?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. I think that remains an open question. The pilots last year, you're right, they were in a strike position. They got right up to the 11th hour and then secured a deal with a pretty significant wage increase. The difference there, though, is that we were facing an election. Election was imminent at that point, and the Conservatives had said that Poilievre said that he would not intervene in the dispute if he were prime minister, which really sort of outflanked the Liberals on the left. The Liberals had been very overzealous and quite heavy-handed with their use of back-to-work orders for the previous year and a half against rail workers, Canada Post, Teamsters, a number of unions, right? They had done this several times. And they essentially faced a situation where the Conservatives were applying pressure. And so they backed off and allowed things to proceed. Now, they're not facing an election now. So the question is, do they make the same political calculation, or do they feel that they have the room to again intervene in a way that I would say is very unhelpful for labor relations, but would prevent work disruption?
All questions we'll have to see the answers to in the coming days and hours. Thank you very much, Adam, for being with us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's Adam King here in Winnipeg, assistant professor in the Labor Studies program over at the University of Manitoba. Now, we're looking at the labor aspect of this. As for travelers, in case you've missed some of the information, Air Canada has said customers whose flights are canceled will be notified by email and text and will be eligible for a full refund. But there are issues with rebooking, and also if you change your flight or when you make your changes, if it's before a labor action is confirmed, there's a lot of different details here that you should be up to date on.